about them. We are all like gardens. I know many of you have your own gardens of various sizes. Some it's just a couple of vegetables in the back. Others it's an herb garden for seasoning of your food. And still others of you have orchards, it seems, in which you grow many, many things. But regardless of whether you own a garden or not, I think many of us understand how they operate. Typically, you start off with seed. You go out and buy what you want to plant. You then prepare the soil in which you're going to plant that seed, cultivate it properly, and then you give it things like water. You make sure they get enough sun, but not too much. And above all, you make sure you give that plant time, because you can't rush it. You can't make it flower any faster. You can't make it mature or make the things it produces grow any quicker than what it's going to do. But you can nurture it and give it the best chance to produce the fruit it is meant to produce. But sometimes unwanted things show up in a garden, right? It seems like after every rainstorm, something finds its way in, some weed or something you don't want. And it's funny, because it's like, hey, I didn't plant that. Why does it show up? It just seems to overgrow and just keep coming back. But yet it is the task of the people that tend it to take those out. Make sure those plants have freedom to grow and not be strangled out by some weeds. So in the same way, we too are like these gardens. Things have been planted in us. We've been given a foundation of some sort. We've been nourished by friends, family, and by our Father in heaven. We've been given what we need, but yet things still pop up in our lives. Impatience, some frustrations, maybe a bit of anger or disappointment. Things that can strangle out other things. Things that are good to get rid of. And so it is with encouragement today that we look at God, the heavenly gardener, and how he helps us out in tending our lives and the things that grow in it. Now, Isaiah had an interesting passage as he had a message from the Lord, and he used an image of a garden to convey God's message. It was quite interesting. He started off by saying it was a love song for one who owned a vineyard. And then Isaiah goes through this very detailed description of this garden and the labors that went into producing it. So it says, this unnamed gardener digs up the land, clears it of stones, cultivates it, plants the most choice of vines in it, begins growing a vineyard. The person puts a watchtower in it to be able to survey the land and watch out for things that would dare to come into it. Not like deer ever come into gardens, right? The person also cuts out a wine press to have on site so those grapes can be made into wine as soon as they are ready to go. Every preparation this person could have made has been done. But there's a problem. When they go to look for good fruit, they find only bad fruit. The problem has been put before this gardener. Something's not right. And this is where Isaiah switches in his way of delivering his message. All of a sudden, he goes from telling a story to now wanting the audience to be involved in the assessment of the story. And so Isaiah says, hey, you dwellers of Jerusalem and you people of Judah, judge between this gardener and this garden. And he begins to describe, what more could I have done for this garden? I mean, I cleared it of stone. I gave it the best chance to produce. I built a watchtower to watch out for things that would munch on my fruit. I've done everything I could. What more could I do? To Isaiah's audience, the answer is clear and without really any question. You've put time, energy, and resources into something that isn't going to return. God bless you. And it hasn't returned for you. And in the ancient times in which survival is of the utmost importance, you can't waste resources on things that don't produce. You're talking about an agricultural society in an area where vineyards were a huge source of income. I don't know if any of you know this, but in the ancient world, it was safer to drink the wine than the water, because you didn't have the means to cleanse the water of the day any better. But you could produce wine that wasn't very alcoholic, so children to adults alike could consume it without really much risk of having their tummies get upset or anything of the like. But so Isaiah says what this gardener will do. He will tear down the walls, the hedge, the things that protect the garden, and will let it become overgrown. He won't cultivate it anymore. He'll let it go. He won't put any more into it. And Isaiah's audience may very well have agreed with that, except they don't know who this is. Isaiah never said who the gardener is until the very end, when he reveals who it is. It is said, I will command the clouds not to rain on it. I don't know many farmers that have the ability to command the weather. So all of a sudden it's apparently clear who this person is and who the gardener is. It is God who has planted and laid a foundation for all of us, for humanity. And he has looked for good fruit and not found it. And through Isaiah's message, God's people have been invited to pass judgment not upon some arbitrary gardener, but upon themselves. Now you could probably say, wow, Pastor, what kind of vacation did you have that you come back with that? But to me, I find encouragement, not just condemnation in this passage, because first and foremost, God has made us his utmost important gardener, hasn't he? He's given us an entire world in which to sustain us, to let us live, to give us the best opportunity to not only serve each other, but to serve God faithfully. He's taken careful preparation to do things for us so that we have the best chance to produce good fruit. And above all, he has looked for good fruit. He's not looking for bad fruit in our lives. He's looking for good things. He's optimistic when he looks into our lives and into our souls. So to me, I see a lot of hope from God. That he's not out to get us. He's actually looking for us to succeed, and in a good way at that. Now, on the condemnation side, I think it's also good for us to kind of hold that in our minds as well. That we're not just off the hook at all times, but that we should be caught in the reality that we are made to be accountable, and that we shouldn't waste resources of other people, much less God's. So it is good for us to remember that God nourishes, but also looks for good fruit in our lives. God's Son also talked about fruit at times. And so in this morning's passage found in Matthew, Jesus is talking about some false prophets, but uses an illustration of fruit to describe how to assess people. Jesus did this quite often, in which he would use a very easy illustration, something his audience would know. Fruit. Oh, okay, we know how to look for good fruit, because if we pick bad fruit, we know it a few minutes later. It's not very good. And so Jesus teaches his audience about how to assess who false prophets were. What he's speaking about goes all the way back to the Old Testament and to the prophets back then, because the basis of this entire conversation is that Jesus wants you to know that there are true and false prophets, true and false teaching. And so he gives a way to discern the difference between the two and how that happens. God bless you. And so Jesus says, you will know them by their fruit. I think in the modern world we have similar sayings, don't we? You want to see, if someone says something, you want to see the evidence, right? You want to see the works. And so you want to see confirmation that what they're saying is shown in how they live and what they do. And not just when you're watching, but when they are out and about and doing everything normal. And for me, there's an encouraging thing here that Jesus says. Because I'm one that also can doubt sometimes how good I am. And in here I find some encouragement for those of us that may have some self-doubt from time to time. He says, a good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. Hear that again. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So to me that doubts from time to time how good I am, Jesus is saying directly, hey, if you're producing good fruit, you know what you are. At the moment, you are a good tree. So don't try and argue with me that you're not good enough for me, because if what you're producing is good, then you know what you are. Now, on the flip side of that, if we find ourselves in a season in which we're producing bad fruit, I think there's some encouragement still, because Jesus uses a living organism to describe something that produces bad fruit. Think about it. For those of us that have gardens, are there times in which we find a plant that's not doing so hot? It's not doing well. Maybe it got too much sun. It was overwatered. Or maybe an early frost came and took a bite out of it. Or maybe a rabbit or a deer. But sometimes with enough care, something that was bad or was not producing very well can have a chance to come back. And what was a bad fruit, a bad tree, a bad plant, can produce good fruit yet again. Both in the Old and New Testament, I see this all the time coming from God. That regardless of the message he gave, whether it was a harsh one of warning or judgment upon his people, God always included hope for the future. That if we turned ourselves around, there would be grace for us. We see that especially with Jesus coming to the earth, saying, if you turn and follow me, there will be forgiveness and eternal life. And so I find great hope that Jesus says, you will know people by their fruit, but fruit comes in seasons, which means there's a chance to change bad fruit to good fruit. I think we all know that, right? From time to time, we might have a couple fruits of impatience, of frustration, anger. I don't know. I'm just saying a few things that come to mind. You know, we get that way from time to time. It can get a little cranky, and that happens. But those are seasons. And the very next day, we could be joyful. We could find patience. But to do that, we need to take a look at our garden, don't we? We need to do an assessment of what is within us. Just like from Isaiah, there's a watchtower. We too should also get a wide view of how our lives are. And to be truthful. Because just like in a real garden, you see a weed or something that's not meant to be there, so too we should do an inventory to see what's going on in us, what's growing in here, so we can figure out what needs to be pulled out and how best to handle it. And so it is my encouragement that let's be good tenders to our own garden. Because in our lives, certainly there are things that we have planted. We have tried to be more patient. We've tried to be more understanding. We have planted those seeds. Others have also given us a chance to have things planted in us. Family members, friends, mom and dad, all kinds. They have given us things that we hold within us that have grown up over the years, but there are also things that find their way in. Some things that we don't want. And it's only by doing a wide view of who we are that we can really see what's there and what needs to come out. But thanks be to God, friends, that we're not in this alone. That God is willing to step in and help us. He's only a prayer away. And if we let him know that there's some weed that needs to be ripped out of us, I think he'll very graciously meet the request and help us with it. But we're also in this with a body of believers around us. Because thanks be to God that we're not the only ones that deal with a little bit of anger and frustration from time to time. We wouldn't be the first in history. So we can go to each other and ask for some help. Ask for some accountability. And if they see that little sproutling of a weed popping up, they can say, hey, you notice that? You're a little short today. And they can help us. It is a good thing. And just like a garden, each season is new. And we have a chance to change our lives into something beautiful. Because God is looking for good fruit from us. He is cheering us on and eager to see it. So let us be thankful for what has been laid before us and look forward to showing him good fruit. Thanks be to God. Amen.